Now, for those who've just joined us, welcome to. My name is Michael Howden, and welcome to this Institute of Internal Auditors session, One Turn Lows 60-minute session, near misses and emerging risks. For those who've not met One Turn before, One Turn is the CEO of the Singapore Accountancy Commission. The Singapore Accountancy Commission serves to develop and nurture the accountancy sector in transforming Singapore into the global accountancy hub. As the Chief Executive, One Turn leads the SAC in collaborating with local and international communities to promote accountancy talent development, develop professional accountancy services, research and thought leadership. Always having a passion for teaching, One Turn is an adjunct associate professor with the NUS Business School, where he teaches enterprise risk management and social media sentiment. As an advocate for continuing education, One Turn serves as a member of the Institute of Technical Education's Business Service Academic Advisory Committee. One Turn volunteers as the immediate past president of the Institute of Internal Auditors in Singapore, on the management committee of the Securities Investors Association Singapore, and as the honorary secretary as a direct counsellor of the Central Singapore CDC. I'd like to welcome One Turn to the session today. One Turn, I'm just opening up your mic there. Good morning there.
Morning, Michael. Thanks very much for the introduction.
There we are. Pass control to you. Enjoy the session, everyone.
Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope that you've had your lunch or are eating your lunch at this point in time. There are not that many slides. I hope that these slides will be available to you after the presentation. The reading materials for these slides, there's about 20 slides. The reading materials are on page 21, which I will go through at the end of the presentation. And on the last slide of this presentation, there will be my contact details, and so my link to LinkedIn if you need to connect up with me. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them via the chat facility. I'm not a fast typer, so bear with me. And my keyboard, the letter Y and the letter U seems to be not working. So if you see any misspelling, please accept my apologies, but I'll try to type as fast as I can. Moving very quickly, let me go to the synopsis of this presentation, and hope that you all have read through this. Now, the synopsis may appear to be very technological focused. It's not meant to be totally. The reason is that the recent events with regards to risk has been associated with technology, so hackers, viruses, things going wrong, and even I've got an example on Apple iPhone 4. So even though they are quite technologically focused, what I really wanted to do was to use them as examples to demonstrate the bigger picture that we really cannot manage risk in the traditional way of looking at just impact and likelihood or probability. Because overall we are biased, we cannot really understand probability, and if that's the case, then the traditional way of looking at risk from an IIA internal audit point of view is not the only way of looking at it. So what I hope to achieve by the end of today is really ability to think in a different way for most of us, or all of us, that we don't use the traditional ISO 31000 way of looking at risk, where we look at impact and probability or impact and likelihood, and then come up with a heat map and then think that we are doing our job. Far from it. In fact, the speed at which things are going to go wrong is going to be very fast. And if we as internal auditors still persist in the same way as to which we do audit planning and audit execution, my fear is that we'll be way behind the curve. So hopefully this will start your thinking. This would be just the beginning for all of you or for all of us, that if you're able to think of new ways of doing internal audits, I think that'll be the main thing that I hope to leave with you behind. One of the future topics that I hope to cover with the IIA is really on the topic of combined assurance, which is really the next step to this session. Combined assurance is looking at the whole gamut of assurance providers, both internal and external, and how do we combine or add them all together. And combined assurance has been a topic in the King's Code of Corporate Governance version 3 4 or 5 years ago. Even though it's been out there and linked to integrated reporting, not many people have latched onto it. And I think that's a hidden gem, and I believe that companies that can implement combined assurance well will win the day in terms of managing the risk. And like I say, risks are really in the unknown realm right now. So with that as a synopsis, let me jump into slide number 3. The World Economic Forum report, risk report, these are very good reading. And if you have not read them, I really highly encourage you to read these reports. The latest one, 2015, has just been issued in just last month. And even though the previous ones in 2014 and 2013 are dated by now, but I'll still encourage you to read at least the last 3 risk reports, 2013, 2014, and 2015, largely because you can see the trend in which global risk has changed from something that we can manage or somewhat predict in the past. And now, the order of the day is that risk is really very difficult to foresee. And if that's the case, then how can we manage risk in the traditional heat map manner? So let me start with the Global Risk Report 2014. And this is where there's a section that says that the cyberspace has proved resilient to attacks, but yet the underlying issue is that it's always been easier to attack than to defend. And that's really true. The defenders are always one step behind the curve. No amount of firewalls, encryption, passwords, no amount of technology, the way I've seen things happening, will be able to stop the next things from happening, the next attack, the next hack from happening. So it's, the World Economic Forum report has provided a very dire prediction. It goes to say that the world may only be one disruptive technology away from attackers gaining a runaway advantage, meaning that the internet would cease to be a trusted medium for communication or commerce. You know, back in 2014, when this was first issued, that's almost a year ago, I thought, yeah, these probably people are, these guys are just, crying wolf and chicken little, the sky is falling. But that was in January 2014, and yet subsequent to that, the events have occurred in April and in September 2014. Really put paid to this scary prediction that we are just one step away from disaster from the technological point of view, and that has a snowball effect on many things. So with that as a basis, so please do read the 2014 report. It's still very relevant. In there, it talk about cyber wildfires, where things in the cyber world can really go out of control. And it's very difficult to predict these cyber wildfires. Now, if I go to the next slide on page 4, I will start to talk about what are some of the examples that put paid to the prediction in January of 2014 of the World Economic Forum Risk Report. The first of which was just less than a year ago, in April of 2014. And some of you may have read about this thing called heartbleed. And when it first came out, the whole world got all excited, or the cybersecurity experts got all excited, and people went on to say that heartbleed has the potential to be one of the biggest, most widespread vulnerability in the history of modern web. And that was just less than a year ago in April 2014. And heartbleed has been around for a long time. And yet, when people found it, they say, wow, it's going to be it's the biggest thing. But what if we have not found it? What would have been the situation? But fine, we found this heartbleed thing, and everybody got all excited, and we had all the bug fixes. So a lot of responses, a lot of crisis management, and now you start to begin to understand that the response part of controls will be a very crucial part of your strategy moving forward. I think as internal auditors, we do spend time on looking at crisis management, business continuity plans. But I think we have not done enough because we think that BCPs and DRPs are in the domain of technology. And yet in the business part of organizations, how do we respond to crises related to reputation, for example? I think we're very ill-prepared. and internal auditors probably have not spent enough time on that. So coming back to heartbleed, that was just less than a year ago, and we say, wow, heartbleed is really scaring all of us. And yet, just a few months later of that, in September of 2014, this on slide 5, we have shell shock. And they say that shell shock is like so alarming that it is worse than heartbleed. So when heartbleed came out, it was like the big thing. And yet when shell shock came on, it was even bigger than heartbleed. So that's kind of scary. That one thing led to the other, and we have heartbleed and we have shell shock. So where does it end? And you know, if you look at the 2014 World Economic Forum report, we just have to be prepared that we are just one step behind the next big thing. I'll just take a pause here. We've got a question from Sata, Kayo Sata. And she says that most exploits are based on vulnerabilities. So firewalls and malware are all checking on reactive defenses. Surely the most proactive measure has to be better software design without better hosts, properly, more fully tested before release. My thoughts, please. Well, Sata, I hope that I got your name correct. The challenge with the software is that no amount of testing, no amount of development time will stop bugs from happening in software. So there will always be holes in there, even after they've been properly tested before release. And you may say, how can that happen? Well, no, software, technology, they're all connected. You may be secure, you may be well tested, but the moment you connect it to other devices, you know, the internet is this huge thing. You may be well tested, all your bugs you think have been fixed. The moment you connect, you'll just be part of other people's network. And when other people have holes in their system, their holes will affect your system. So the only way of not having any holes is just shut down everything that you have and not be connected. And of course, that's not practical. So I think we have a false sense of security when we think we have firewalls and malware and antivirus software, passwords, proper testing, and we think that we are well protected, but we are not. There will always be gaps, always be holes. In the old days when we can manage and predict some of these risks and be better prepared, maybe it's all right. But the way that technology is moving now is just too scary. And as I go on to the 2015 World Economic Forum report, it gets even scarier. I'm not sure some of you have seen the latest experiment conducted by IBM and Samsung in the thing called Internet of Things, IoT. IoT may seem a bit of a science fiction right now, but by my reckoning, Internet of Things or IoT will certainly change the world significantly. And the latest experiment is quite interesting. IBM and Samsung demonstrated a washing machine. Quite interestingly, and this washing machine was able to detect that it was low on soap, washing powder, and based on that detection, the washing machine would automatically place an order with the nearest supermarket and pay in cryptocurrency or Bitcoin. And the washing machine will be able to detect, based on the TV program that's been watched by the family, that it wouldn't run the spin cycle because the sound would disturb the family. So you might think that these are just science fiction and interesting concept, but it's really, really scary because if you look at the underlying technology, the things that they're using. So if you look at this example of the washing machine, they even use technology like BitTorrent, technology like cryptocurrency, and they start connecting all these things. And when you connect complex algorithms, complex protocols, you can just imagine what can go wrong. Or you can just imagine what you don't know, what can go wrong. So I think that's one big item to look at, Internet of Things, and not to dismiss it as science fiction. So coming back to the presentation slide, so we have heartbleed, we have shell shock, and by my reckoning, that will not be the end of it. And as internal auditors, you really, really need to go and talk to your IT departments and shock them a little bit, if I may say that, to tell them, look guys, you have to be prepared to mop up. You have to be prepared for things going really wrong and your crisis management, disaster recovery, business continuity got to be 10 times what is in today. So the amount of investment in controls, not just in the preventive, but in the reactive controls, that's going to be extremely crucial. Let me just go on to the next slide. So in the 2015 report, and this is really hot off the press, and I encourage you to read this. And the report goes on to say that the pace of technological change is faster than ever. So it goes to talk about things like synthetic biology and artificial intelligence. It doesn't really talk about Internet of Things, but that's really is what it's alluding to. But the one phrase that got me really even more worried is that the 2015 report says that at the same time, all these things that is happening, they present hard to foresee risks. And this is really a reiteration of the previous 2014 report that says that we are one step behind, and a lot of risk that is coming out, we won't see it until it occurs. And we really need fresh thoughts in how we do this. So on page 7, this is from the World Economic Forum 2014 report, and I really subscribe to this phrase that says that fresh thinking at all levels on how to preserve, protect, and govern the common good of the trusted cyberspace must be developed, and not just the cyberspace, but really in all business aspects of the organization, unless we think beyond the ISO 31000, and that has been around for a long time, and we are really behind the curve in terms of how we manage risk. Do not think of white bears, and at this point in time, all 30 of you are thinking of white bears. So this is just a simple bias where we cannot control our biases, and as internal auditors, all the more we need to be aware of biases because of the unpredictability of risk and the speed at which things go wrong. By understanding biases, we're able to manage risk better. You may think that, yeah, not thinking of white bears is just a fun bias, but because we are wired to think in a certain way, and the next few slides is really by virtue of how we are wired, we have this thing called the neglect of probability. We have this bias that we ignore probability. And if that's the case, then if you look at the traditional heat map of impact and likelihood, if we ignore likelihood or probability, then how can we manage risk? That we only look at the impact. So our eyes will only be focused on the white bear. Our eyes will only be focused on the things which are impactful or things which are in your head at this point in time, the white bear. Things which are not in our heads, we will not think of it because we have no idea of the impact and we ignore probability. So with the white bear in all your heads right now, just a couple of examples. 2 experiments that has been conducted. One is called the game of chance, and the other one is the electric shock experiment in the next slide. But if you look at the game of chance, and I have a game of pokey here, in this experiment, it's a famous experiment, and it comes from the book Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, which is in the list of important readings that I hope that you will go away with after this presentation. In the first game, you can win $10 million, and in the second game, you can win $10,000. And the catch is that there is a probability or likelihood. So the impact, you can win 10 million, the likelihood is you will have one chance in 100 million. And the same thing goes for the second game. And the question always asked is that which game will you play? And without fail, most people will choose the first game because it can win $10 million. But if you just do the maths, you know that the probability of winning the first game is lower than the second game. So you should play the second game because the maths tell you so. But yet at the same time, most people will play the first game because they ignore the probability. And this simple experiment in its various permutations just really tells us that we cannot and we should not just rely on ISO 31000 traditional way of looking at risk management. We should still continue, of course, but that alone cannot be the order of the day. The second experiment is called the electric shock experiment, and here we have a experiment where we have 2 groups, group 1 and group 2. Group 1 were told that they will be given a small electric shock, and this was a certainty. So they were told that for we have a 100% chance of being shocked by electric shock. So it wasn't less than 100%, it was 100%, this was for sure. And the second group, they were told that they were only given a shock half the time, and the other half of the time they were not, so only 50% of the time. And when the researchers measured the level of anxiety on both groups, the results were, well, shocking. It showed that both groups were equally stressed, even though the second group only had half a chance of being zapped by electric shock. They were just as stressed, even though they were given half a chance. So this experiment really proves the point that the previous game experiment showed, that people are not focused on the probability. They look at the impact. And interestingly, if you look at the next slide, the amount of impact was even irrelevant in this experiment of shock. So in the first permutation of this experiment, for the second group, the researchers told the group that they will reduce the probability of the shock from 50% to 20% to 10% to 5%. And even though they had a low level of probability of being shocked, the stress level was still the same. The stress level of the second group was as high as the first group, which was a certainty of being shocked, 100%. So at 5% probability of being shocked, they had the same level of stress as those groups that had 100% probability of being shocked. So once again, this put paid to the concept that people will ignore probability. And even when the stress level was, the shock level was increased for both groups, the anxiety level just increased in the same way, even though the level of probability was much lower for the second group as opposed to the first group. So in conclusion, for these two experiments, we respond to the order of magnitude, the expected magnitude of an event. So traditionally, for many of us, we look at risk events in the lingo of enterprise risk management. We look at the magnitude, we look at the impact, but we don't look at the likelihood. And this is where we are blindsided. This is where, when we look at the magnitude, we only think of the white bears, because we only have white bears in our head at that point in time. If there are no white bears, we will not think of it. So these are all the hidden risks, as what the World Economic Forum report is saying. All the hidden risks out there that we are just waiting for them to come out. The next shell shock, the next heartbeat, the next big thing that's going to bite us from behind. So if you read the book System 1 and System 2 Thinking, or Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, the neglect of probability is a cognitive bias that has a tendency to completely disregard probability when making a decision. So if you look at that screen on page 12, the traditional heat map, where you look at impact and likelihood, and of course this is a 3 by 3, and ISO 31000 talks about 5 by 5. How can we really make a good risk management decision when we ignore, we are biased to disregard probability? So we will only look at the high impact items. Even in the shocking experiment, it showed that even the low impact things, we'll look at it. So we are really, really biased when it comes to enterprise risk management, and that surely we have to relook at the whole thing. So how can we really manage risk if we only understand impact, if we only understand the white bear, and we disregard likelihood? This is another case study that I just wanted to share with you. Some of you may not be familiar with this, but back in 2010, Pepsi felt that instead of spending so much money on Super Bowl advertisement, and Super Bowl just passed on Monday this week, they spend, I think for 30-second slot on Super Bowl, it's like millions of dollars. So Pepsi was saying that instead of spending millions of dollars on the NFL Super Bowl advertisements, why don't we use this money to award to people, to give grants to people who have great ideas? And so they started the Pepsi Refresh project. You can do a Google search on it. And when it was launched in 2010, they had thousands and thousands of people giving ideas, and Pepsi gave away millions of dollars, and $20 million in grants to individuals and businesses and non-profit organizations to help them put the invest in their ideas and to implement. And these ideas was really to how to have a positive impact on the community, the state, or the US itself. So by all measure, if you were doing a risk management of the Pepsi Refresh project in 2010, by all measure, you have thought that it was a successful project. With thousands of ideas, millions of dollars given away, great ideas. And if you do the internet search, you watch on YouTube, it looked like a runaway success. And yet, just 2 years later in 2012, Pepsi abandoned this whole project. From a huge fanfare, big launch, lots of social media, everybody excited, it was abandoned. Because Pepsi had a declining market share, they fell behind third place to Coke and even Diet Coke. Of course, you may say there are other factors that caused them to fall behind and other taste issues. But yet, something that seemingly seen as successful can be abandoned just like that. So as internal auditors, when we look at risk, how do we not avoid situation like another Pepsi Refresh project? So with that as a background, so the two main things that I just want to share with you before I go into the methodology of near misses. One is that we are biased towards the white bears. We only have white bears in our heads because we are biased towards a neglect of probability. We cannot see what we cannot see or what we don't want to see. And secondly, we must believe that based on the World Economic Forum risk reports, we are always one step behind, that we cannot see it coming, that we are always behind the attackers. So you combine that, the fact that we're always behind, or the notion that we're always behind, and that we have a neglect of probability bias, then I put forth to you that the traditional risk management impact likelihood cannot work. Then we need to then go back one step and say, instead of identifying risk events and going the traditional route, we go way before even the risk is identified, or what we call pre-risk situation. And this is what we term as near misses. And there's a Harvard Business Review article back in 2011 on how to avoid catastrophe. That's in the list of readings on page 21. So near misses is a very important concept that I think still has not caught on yet, and a lot of people are not aware of it. But I really encourage you to read it, especially given the last 3 years of the World Economic Forum risk report. So what really are near misses? If you read the article on, which is published by the Harvard Business Review, that's in August of 2011 or April of 2011. Let me just check. Yeah, April of 2011. People think of near misses as close calls. That, oh, I almost got hit by a car, I almost got into an accident, I almost ate something that could be bad for my stomach, or fireman, like this example, a fireman almost got killed before the building collapsed on him. But yet, this is the traditional way of looking at near misses. But the near misses in the risk management realm, near misses these are things that are small errors, small mistakes that we think are unremarked, small failures. Things that are not critical, like day-to-day activities, but yet these are the things that can cause the downfall of the organization. And people are hardwired to ignore these warnings, which are embedded in these small failures. They go and examine, and yet this what the article called innocuous events. If this latent errors, as described by the article, exists. All you need is for something to happen, then the whole thing just goes wrong. And in this article, and you should read them, there are 4 very good case studies. One is on Apple, which I'll just share in a little while, the Apple iPhone example. Secondly, they focus on JetBlue Airways. Third, they look at Lexus, the fault with the brake systems. And then fourthly, they look at the BP oil disaster, the Deepwater disaster. But just very quickly on the Lexus example, where Toyota ignored a lot of complaints about the brake systems, and only when something went wrong, then they did something, which by then it was too late. It resulted in a $2 billion loss in sales opportunity for Lexus. $2 billion. And and in the current world right now, we have all these recalls and problems with airbags. And to me, that is a real big category of near miss. And not just talking about airbags, but if you look at the whole auto industry, if you have something like so important like an airbag that is not known until now, this thing has erupted. So airbags problem has been around for a long time. And now we have this massive recall, massive problem, and it's going to erupt as a crisis for the car manufacturers. And yet, we ask ourselves, what else is there that we don't know about when it comes to the car manufacturing industry? What next? What next that we don't know of? So this, the clear example of what the World Economic Forum 2014 report says that we're one step behind. Not necessarily behind the attackers, but we're one step behind the what can go wrong. And the way this is going, all industries, whether it's car industry, the banking industry, retail, food and beverage, professional services, we are all just one step behind that crisis that erupts. So the case study, Antenna Gate, this is well documented in the Harvard Business Review article, How to Avoid Catastrophe. So in this situation, well, not too long ago, iPhone 4, of course we have iPhone 6 right now, and instead of Antenna Gate, we have Bend Gate. Some of you may have bought the iPhone 6, and you realize that this iPhone 6 have this tendency to bend if you put it in your back pocket. But that's another story. But you can do a Google search of Bend Gate. But coming back to Antenna Gate, there were lots of complaints when iPhone 4, not 4S, but iPhone 4, when it first came out. A lot of people say that the reception was very bad. And the bars, the number of bars on the phone was very low. And Apple sort of ignored that. And Steve Jobs, when he was still alive, said that all phones have sensitive areas. You were just holding it on the wrong way. If you hold it properly, the bars will come up and you wouldn't have all this reception problem. So we had probably thousands of people complaining that iPhone 4 was bad because of the reception issue, cellular reception. And Apple just ignored it, and they thought that it was just one of those things. As internal auditors, we cannot ignore things which are categorized as one of those things. These things called one of those things will come back and bite you. So when we ignore one of those things and we only focus on the white bears, that's when a crisis will happen. And this is exactly what happened in the iPhone 4 case or Antenna Gate, when a very important organization called Consumer Reports gave a very bad review of iPhone 4, and Consumer Reports say that don't buy iPhone 4. And as a result of which a social media crisis erupted. And this is, that's the other thing about the social media, this thing called the herd mentality, which is also another bias, that the herd tend to follow what the other people are doing. There's a saying that goes that if 50 million people say the wrong things, it's still wrong, no matter what. So you have all these millions of people out there thinking that, yeah, iPhone 4 is bad because of the antenna problem. And one thing led to the other, and it gets so bad that iPhone had to call a press conference. Steve Jobs had to come back from his holiday from Hawaii and to tell the reporters that, yes, we acknowledge that there is a fault in the antenna design for iPhone 4, but guess what? The other phones of the other manufacturers had the same problem. But by then it was too late. Apple suffered a reputational damage that was, well, they could recover for it, but they left a bad aftertaste and probably allowed organizations like Samsung and in those days BlackBerry to steal a march on iPhone or Apple. So do read the article on how to avoid catastrophe. Very, very good article that focuses on the 4 case studies: Apple, JetBlue Airways, Lexus, and Deepwater Bay, BP, all disaster case study. Very, very good case studies. So in sort of conclusion, just let me share with you that with the World Economic Forum report 2013, 2014, 2015, that you cannot predict risk. It's very difficult to predict risk. Not say you cannot, but it's very difficult. Things will just go wrong. They're all lurking behind. We are all blinded by our white bears. We are all blinded by biases, whether it's herd mentality, whether it's neglect of probability. We just cannot see. And if you look at the how to avoid catastrophe article, there's one more bias that I would like for you to read about. Is what we call the outcome bias, which is really you cannot fight with success. When things go right, when nothing goes wrong, you would think that there's no risk in there because you can't argue with success. And yet, when things are successful, that is also an indicator that something could go wrong because there's a reason for you to succeed. There's a reason why people succeed. It's because they push the boundaries, they push very hard, and in today's organizations, KPIs are really, really very powerful stuff to motivate people sometimes to do the wrong things. So fraud, for example, is a result of very tall order KPIs that people cannot reach in the ordinary way. So if they can't reach it properly, then they resort to fraud or fraudulent practices in order to reach KPIs. So when somebody is successful, you should look at it and ask yourself, why are they successful? So success is another category of near miss, where you ask yourself, are they successful for the right reasons or are they successful for the wrong reasons? So this is where, once again, fresh thinking, but yet, because we are burdened by this bias, outcome bias, we will not look at things as successful. Why would internal auditors look at successful things? When a project is successful, we do project risk management. Seldom do we pick up a project that's successful, we look at it and say, why? Because it's successful, why bother? The auditee will come after you. We only look at projects that are either failed or delayed. And this is where people say, well, internal auditors, we go in after, we bayonet the wounded because we only look at things which are the white bears, things which are impactful, projects which have gone wrong, projects which are delayed are the white bears in our head. We don't look at other things. So Steve Jobs, you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backwards. This is a quote from Steve Jobs during his Stanford University commencement address. So have a read through that, that's pretty good speech. And the last slide, before I sort of share with you the reading materials, is from the World Economic Forum Risk Report 2014, where it says that resilience is the most applicable to unpredictable risk with little knowledge and about effective measures. So if we have no idea about the predictability of risk, we have no idea about how to deal with this unknown risk, well, it's oxymoron. How can you deal with risk if it's unknown? So by default, we are in the lower left-hand quadrant, where we say we have low knowledge and low predictability of risk. Then the thing that you really must do is to strengthen resilience. We need to build the ability to bounce back. And here, the 2014 report has a very, very good discussion on the methodology for building resilience at the national level, country level, and for which you can apply to organizations. So I will read through the 2014 report. It's one of the best methodologies I've seen for building resilience in organizations. And it's a very simple one. It can be easily implemented. And this matrix here, helping people to understand, no, you should take this and show this to your risk committee, to your audit committee, and say, if you look at the traditional ERM impact likelihood heat map, you end up with the top right-hand quadrant, where you use anticipatory strategies. We use firewalls, we use passwords, we use controls, but in the real world that's happening right now, the way I see it, we just got to go have a bit of both. Strengthen resilience and have at the same time anticipatory strategies. So with that, hopefully I've given you some lunchtime thoughts as to how we needed fresh thinking, actually because risks are happening at a pace where we just cannot predict it anymore. It's going to happen. The next heartbeat, the next shell shock, when it happens, don't be shocked. And then secondly, we are just biased. We are blinded by the white bears in our head. We have neglect of probability, and this is where I urge you to read a bit more on biases, outcome bias, herd mentality bias. All these are the things that can blind us, and because we are behind the curve when it comes to risk identification, we are really not even a one-eyed man in the land of the blind. We are really blind in the land of the blind. We cannot see. And so with that, let me end, and of course I'll be happy to take questions from the group. It's approaching 10:45. The references on page 21, very good article, How to Avoid Catastrophe by Harvard Business Review, April 2011. Very, very, very good reading. It gives you a near-miss methodology, a 7-step methodology that you can implement in your organization. Of course, you have the also key risk indicators. It's a nice article, but I think it's a little bit dated, even though it's 2011, not too long ago or so. But I think this developing KRI is a good concept, but I think it needs to be relooked at. And some of you may know that COSO ERM is being refreshed right now, and it's long overdue for refresh. And you know, many of us, when COSO ERM first came out, it was really confusing because it came out with a cube, and COSO controls framework also had a cube. So it's like, so which cube are you talking about? So hopefully they get rid of the cube, or maybe color the cube differently for COSO ERM version 2, which I think will come out sometime in 2015. They just started the project. I think PwC was engaged probably on a closer pro bono basis to relook at the whole COSO ERM framework, and maybe that will give ISO 31000 a run for the money. Now, ISO 31000 is good, but I think it's too mechanical. COSO ERM is good, but it's just too high level, so maybe they'll marry the two. Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, a very good book on biases, very easy reading. I would encourage you to read that book. The next book, Art of Thinking Clearly, very good book also on biases by Rolf Doberly. So these two books are easy reading, something that can go the weekend and learn all about biases and how that impacts internal auditors. And lastly, the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report. These are freely available to download. Read through 2013, which is very traditional. We're looking at risk. 2014, they talk about digital wildfires. And 2015, it really tells you that risk is becoming even more difficult to predict. And once again, we really need to build resilience. Helping as internal auditors, we need to go in and help organizations to build resilience. So we want to end up in a situation when things go wrong, we don't want management to say, where were the internal auditors? We want a situation when things go wrong, and they will go wrong, we will say, oh, I didn't see that, but I'm prepared. No, I did not see that, but I am prepared. So wouldn't that be a wonderful thing to say? If we can help organizations come to the point in time when we are not afraid of when things go wrong, when the unpredictable happens, when the so-called black swan happens, we are ready because we have resilience. We know we'll lose an arm, but we will not lose our life when things go wrong. So with that, I come to the last page of my slide. For those of you who have not been to Bhutan, it is a wonderful place. It's somewhere sandwiched between India and China and Nepal. There you see them having breakfast. I'm having breakfast at 4,000 meters at the peak of Bhutan, and as internal auditors, you know, and many a times people say, "Now internal auditors are just pests, and they come in and audit us. They are irritants." But no, at the end of the day, whatever joy, like the Bhutanese proverb, whatever joy we seek, it cannot be achieved by ourselves. And if we want to be miserable, then we'll be miserable. And with that, my contact details on the last slide, wanchen@hotmail.com. I have a LinkedIn profile. If you want to contact me via LinkedIn or LinkedIn with me, I'd be happy to connect with you. And with that, thank you very much for being on board. And I'd be happy to take questions now.
Thanks, Wanchen. So if you do have any questions, just pop them into the chat box. You might want to start with a quick yes. I've got a question. Just type a quick yes, and then follow up the question just so we know about those questions that come through. Now, what you might want to do also is, as you close the session down, let's say you can't stay, there is a feedback form. It would be great if you could take the time to fill that in. Great feedback for Wanchen, and also great feedback for the Institute of Internal Auditors. Thanks for that, Gwen. Excellent information, and thanks for the reading list too. And there's another thanks there coming through from Deborah. Well, Wan Chun, I don't think there's any questions coming through. Are you getting any private questions coming through to you?
None.
None so far. All right. Well, this is a slightly shorter session. I just want to thank everyone for attending today. Wan Chun, thank you very much for presenting today. What is Wan Chun? Oh, yes, you've typed something in there about combined assurance. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending today. We certainly hope you will join us for another Institute of Internal Auditors session. That will be sometime next month, so do keep an eye out for that, and we'll certainly have you covered and have you in the session next time. Till then, I'm playing a bit of music. Thanks a lot.